Welcome to my presentation on the evolution of 2D games. In this presentation I'm going to be going over the evolution of video game hardware over roughly 30 years, the evolution of 2D platformers over 30 years, and the evolution of 2D fighting games over roughly 30 years as well. First, let's start off with the evolution of video game hardware. Originally, the first actual console, home entertainment console, was the Magnavox, which was made in the 1970s. But since I'm going to be focusing on the 1980s, from 1983 to present day, we're not going to go too much into detail on that. So we can jump right to the rapid expansion, which is when many companies were creating their own incarnations of home entertainment consoles, which resulted in the market becoming extremely saturated. And yeah. Here's a summarizing timeline of each generation. I've also included the first and second gen, just because of any added information which you guys might want to take down. But I'm going to be focusing on third to eighth generation, since that's from 1980s onwards. Starting from the third generation, the dominating companies were Nintendo with the Super Nintendo Famicom, Sega with the Sega Master System, and the Commodore 64, although selling less than the Nintendo Famicom, was also known as like one of the best consoles throughout the 1980s. And when we move into the fourth gen, which is when rapid contraction took place, when we move into the fourth gen, which is the 1990s, which is where rapid contraction took place, which is where companies couldn't actually keep up with the pace of change and innovation needed to keep providing good consoles to consumers, which resulted in a fast and heavy drop in the amount of consoles being produced, which is why there's only two tied dominators within the fourth gen, which are the IBM PC-AT and the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, also known as SNES, both selling 50 million units. When we move to the fifth gen, all the way through to the eighth gen, they were generally dominated by Sony's PlayStation, with the PlayStation 1 selling over 100 million units, PlayStation 2 selling over 150 million units, and PlayStation 3 selling around 80 million units. But at the time of the PS3, before the PS3, Microsoft jumped into the fray of the console industry and came out with the Microsoft Xbox, which although only sold 25 million units, was still quite a good start. And later on, they produced the Xbox 360 at the same time as the PS3, which ended up matching its sales by the time the next gen came in. And while I was conducting my research, I also conducted some primary research and interviewed some people on their thoughts of the evolution of video game hardware. I mainly gained a positive response from this. Next, we can move on to evaluate the evolution of 2D platformers. The two 2D platformers I decided to conduct my research on were Sonic, published and developed by Sega in 1991, and Sonic Generations, published in 2011. When we discuss accessibility with both these Sonic games, they're both generally quite accessible, but Sonic Generations is much more catered to the new player or people who have never played games before, as it has an additional auditory tutorial alongside the invisible tutorials, which have been used throughout the whole Sonic franchise since the beginning of its creation. When we talk about visuals, like every other game, they've definitely evolved quite a bit, from 16-bit all the way to 2.5D and 3D. But since we're focusing on 2D, Sonic Generations has evolved to 2.5D. And 2.5D is basically 3D objects or 3D characters within a 2D plane, so only being able to move on the X and Y axis of the screen. So there is no movement of forward and backwards. When we talk about mechanics and verbs of 2D platformers, this is where a lot of development took place and a lot of evolution took place, where the first Sonic originally only had the verbs to run, jump, and also do a little roll that you could do if you held down while already moving. But then they innovated on that specific verb and turned it into a spin dash, which can be used to create instant speed even when stationary if you hold down and hold the jump button, which will charge up and create instant speed. As well as the inclusion of power-ups in later games like Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and 3 and onwards. So for example, a shield would allow Sonic to take one hit even without rings and not die, whereas in the original Sonic, if you had no rings and you took a hit, you would instantly lose and it would be game over. While doing research on these two games, I also conducted some more primary research and asked people's thoughts on the evolution of 2D platformers. And generally, I gained a positive response, but they were also slightly critical since some seem to enjoy the more experimental side of things from the past generations of the Sonic franchise or 2D platformer franchise, 2D platformer genre. Now we can move on to the 2D fighting games. The two 2D fighting games that I chose to conduct research on were Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo and Street Fighter 5. And straight away, I want to talk about tutorials, since Street Fighter 2 Turbo had no tutorial or training mode to actually teach the player how to use the verbs and mechanics or allow the player to get comfortable with it. So the player would kind of just jump in and hope they can get the hang of the game. Whereas Street Fighter 5 has definitely evolved and improved on this by creating a training mode as well as a tutorial in the beginning of the game. The training mode will allow the player to get more comfortable and more set in with the actual verbs and mechanics of the game before actually jumping into a fight. But they also have a choice to jump straight into a fight if they're already comfortable with the controls. This leads us on to the next point of enemy CPU difficulty. And in Street Fighter 2 Turbo, the enemy CPUs were very unforgiving. So when a new player would jump in, they'd have to basically pick a character and just pray that they can actually win against the CPUs. Whereas Street Fighter 5 has changed this, where the player can actually decide how difficult they want the CPU to be, either easy, medium, or hard. Easy these can all change depending on how difficult the player actually wants the CPU to be, depending on their skill level. When we talk about visuals, like with 2D platformers and other games, they've evolved even more. So they went from 16-bit to 2.5D, which again is 3D objects or 3D characters on 2D plane. But then when we move on to the verbs and mechanics, the verbs and mechanics didn't change drastically for fighting games in general, since they want to keep things a set way for each player, for each character. But there are also some changes to certain inputs. For example, Chun-Li's rapid kick in Street Fighter 2 Turbo could be performed just by pressing one button repeatedly, whereas they changed this to make it more fair and less abusable by turning it into a quarter circle input, which is down, forward, depending on which way you're facing, and one kick button. And that move would not last for the whole duration of the match. While doing this research, I also conducted some more primary research and asked some of my classmates to have a go at playing Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and generally I gained quite a negative response from this due to their confusion and lack of understanding when it came to learning the mechanics of the game, since they were never taught how to use the controls or what to do or how they're actually supposed to beat the enemy CPU given to them. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and in the next slide I've got a bibliography, just everything I use.
Okay, thank you very much.